I remember the first time I saw her, it was nothing special. Just a blur of overly tan limbs and peroxide blonde hair, cutting diagonally across my lawn like it was her personal sidewalk. She didn't look my way, didn't slow down, didn't even acknowledge the garden bed she trampled with her wedge sandals. I stood there on my porch, coffee in hand, blinking in disbelief, like I was watching some kind of sitcom character walk by. I wondered if maybe she was just lost, but nope. Same shrill pink tank top, same shrieking voice on the phone. She was back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the week, she was strutting through my property like it was part of her morning cardio. I was starting to notice things about her, like how she didn't care about the fact that my lawn was, well, my lawn. It was my space, my sanctuary. But here she was, stomping across it every morning as if it were a public park. I did the polite thing at first. One morning, I stepped out onto the porch and waved. "Hey, excuse me," I called out. "Could you please use the sidewalk?" She rolled her eyes so hard, I thought they might just pop out of her head. "Sidewalk's uneven," she snapped, never breaking her stride. "Your grass is softer." That was when I knew I was in for something more than just a neighborly annoyance. A few days later, I put up a small wooden sign. "Please stay off the grass." Thought it would do the trick. But, just 3 days later, I found it snapped in half, tossed in my flower bed like a discarded piece of trash. She didn't care. She was making a statement. And it wasn't just about her short cute, it was about power. My lawn, my space. She wasn't going to let me have it. The thing is, I could have let it slide. I could have just shrugged it off and moved on. But it felt like every time I tried to stand up for myself, she pushed harder. Her little yappy dog, Baron, started running loose in my yard. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, she'd laugh and say something like, "If your grass can't handle a little foot traffic, maybe you shouldn't have a yard." It wasn't about the dog or the sidewalk anymore. It was about control. So, I tried a different route. I wrote a complaint to the HOA. I figured, hey, they're supposed to help with this kind of thing. But who answers my complaint? Of course, Karen herself. In her letter, she went on and on about some obscure clause that essentially said my front yard was communal. It wasn't even a legitimate clause. It was something she made up. But I wasn't giving up. I went to the next HOA meeting. Figured I'd get my chance to speak up. But when I started talking about what was going on, Karen just sighed, theatrically, and said, "This sounds like a personal vendetta. Maybe you're just not used to having neighbors." The whole room chuckled, and I sat there, my hands clenched so tight that my knuckles turned white. I wasn't going to let this slide. Karen wasn't going to get away with this. I started planning my revenge not out of anger, but out of strategy. She thought she was stepping on grass, but what she was really stepping on was my last nerve. One night, after Karen had tried to humiliate me again by hosting a little dog party in my front yard, I had an idea. I sat down with a bottle of wine, a stack of HOA bylaws, and a petty fire burning in my soul. And that's when I found the loophole. There was a clause about decorative front yard transformations for erosion control. Erosion control. I smiled to myself. It was the perfect excuse. I started researching landscaping materials, anything that would make her hate stepping on my lawn. Jagged lava rock, crushed glass, a labyrinth of sharp, spiky rocks. Every single rock, every piece of gravel, was chosen with one thing in mind: to make my lawn a place she would never want to step on again. The first time she saw it, she stepped on the gravel, and I'll never forget the sound. Crunch, pop, yell. She hobbled back to the sidewalk, cursing under her breath. And me? I sipped my coffee and whispered, "Welcome to the gravel zone." But Karen didn't stop. Of course not. She came back the next day, gardening gloves on, tape measure in hand, like she was some kind of landscape inspector. This time, though, I was ready. I had a plan, one that would break her down, step by step. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a fight. I wasn't going to react. I was going to outsmart her. I had everything documented. Every time she walked on my property, I had the photos. Every time she tried to undermine me, I had the evidence. And when she filed a complaint with the HOA, I responded with a letter, quoting bylaws and attaching photos. I didn't just fight her with her own weapon bureaucracy, I took it a step further. I started gathering signatures. I went door to door, asking neighbors how they felt about Karen's little shortcut. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I had 32 signatures. Karen had maybe 5, including her hairdresser. But it wasn't over yet. I found out something wild. Karen wasn't even supposed to be on the HOA board anymore. She had overstayed her term by a year and a half. It was the kind of mistake you don't make if you're actually paying attention to the rules. So, when the next meeting came up, I stood up and asked, "Before we proceed, can we clarify something? Who is the current legally elected HOA vice president?" Karen froze. And that was the moment the tide turned. The room was silent. People started to realize that Karen wasn't just a bad neighbor, she wasn't even legally in power. She had been ruling through fear and manipulation. And when her reign finally crumbled, it crumbled fast. At the next meeting, Karen tried to fight back. She showed up with a petition, but it was laughable. A few signatures from her loyal followers, most of them were people who were too afraid to stand up to her. I, on the other hand, had a full petition, 32 signatures from people who had had enough of her tyranny. And when the news broke that Karen was under investigation for fraud, misusing HOA funds, issuing fake fines, the neighborhood rejoiced. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. We had taken back control. We had reclaimed our community from the fear that she had instilled in us for so long. But Karen wasn't done. She tried to rebrand herself. She launched a blog, wrote about how she was misunderstood. She even tried to start a podcast, all about how the neighborhood had gone rogue. But no one bought it. Her reign had ended. The blog got 2 comments, one from her cousin and one from someone named Gravel Daddy 44. And then, the cherry on top, her house, the place where she had ruled with an iron fist, was sold. Not to a family. Not to someone who shared her vision of perfect lawns. No, it was sold to a developer. And what did they do? They turned it into a dog park. A dog park. The very thing she had fought against for years. I walked by that park one day, and I stood there, thinking about everything that had happened. The lawn, the rocks, the fights, the victories. And in that moment, I realized that we had won. Not just because I had reclaimed my lawn, but because we had reclaimed our community. We had turned something petty into something that brought us together. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood was at peace. So what do you think? Would you have stood up to Karen? Or would you have just let it go? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of community, justice, and a little bit of petty revenge.